Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today's topic, at first glance, it might sound a little bit dry.
Hmm.
We're calling this one a leadership balance sheet. But trust me, this is going to be anything but a typical accounting lecture.
Not even close. We're actually going to be looking at this article from Blastland, and they're really trying to push past those just financial metrics to assess, what makes a business successful from a human perspective, like really successful.
Yeah, I was looking at this, and it was really interesting. They list things like empathy and fun as assets.
Mm.
It's like, I mean, they're basically saying that a positive, like an energized culture isn't just like a nice thing to have. It like directly impacts the bottom line.
You got it. It's almost like their whole approach is built around this thing they call these NUCLER principles. It's kind of like they're like a cheat code to unlock all this human potential.
Okay, so break it down for me. What does NUCLER stand for?
So each letter represents a core leadership principle. So N is for navigate uncertainty, U for unite teams, C, cultivate innovation, L, lead with empathy, then you got empower decision making, adapt through agility, and R for reshape the future.
Okay, I mean, at face value, I see how those could be really good for just leadership in general, but how does that connect to this balance sheet idea?
Well, that's what's so interesting about this. Blastland is saying that, the more you master these principles, it's almost like they're adding to your leadership assets. But the more you neglect them, the more likely you are to accrue all these liabilities.
Okay, so give me an example. What's one of those like unexpected assets that they highlight?
So one that really caught my eye was this thing they called a curiosity surge. And it's not just about having curious employees. It's about really fostering an environment where people are encouraged to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, constantly seek new knowledge, not just be happy with the way things are right now.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of fearing the unknown, you're kind of leaning into it.
Yeah.
But how does that curiosity surge? Like how does that actually translate into a benefit, a real benefit for a company?
So Blastland's argument is that it leads to greater innovation, right? Think about it. If everyone's afraid to ask why or challenge the status quo, you're just going to keep doing things the same way, even if there's a better way out there.
Okay, that's a light bulb moment for
Yeah.
me. So I'm seeing how a principle like cultivate innovation can actually directly lead to building up that curiosity surge asset.
Yeah, exactly. And they make that connection really for each of those principles, and they talk about both the short-term and the long-term impacts. So for example, in the long-term assets, they talk about the importance of work-life balance.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, it can feel like a luxury in today's, always on 24/7 world.
For sure. But Blastland actually kind of flips that on its head. They say that emphasizing work-life balance actually leads to a more productive workforce in the long run.
Wait, really? I don't. How does that work?
Well, their argument is that when they feel like their well-being is valued and that they're not constantly on the verge of burning out, they're going to be more engaged, and they're going to bring their best selves to work. It reduces turnover, it strengthens teams, and ultimately, that improves the bottom line.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this whole balance sheet framework kind of comes together. So you have these core principles, these NUCLEAR principles, and by actually embodying those, that's how you increase those valuable assets and avoid the really damaging liabilities.
You got it. And speaking of liabilities, there are some pretty, I think, relatable ones on Blastland's list.
Yeah, I saw those. Internal conflicts, skill gaps. Oh, and decision paralysis. I think we've all been there at some point.
Oh, yeah. And Blastland's point is that these aren't just minor annoyances. They're actually liabilities that can really sabotage a company's success.
So let's break down a couple of those liabilities. What kind of damage can something like internal conflicts, what can that actually do?
Oh, well, think about it. If you've got a team and they're constantly butting heads or there's all this unresolved tension, I mean, it's going to create a toxic environment. It's going to stall progress on projects, and ultimately, the company's just not going to achieve its goals.
Yeah, it's almost like this, like a slow poison,
Yeah.
just kind of eating away at the company's productivity and morale.
Totally. And it's not just the short-term impacts. The Blastland also highlights some of these long-term liabilities that can have, I mean, even more devastating effects.
Like what? Give me the worst case scenario here.
Well, one of the biggest ones they talk about is burnout risk. And this is, if a company's culture is just consistently pushing people to their limits, not providing support, not encouraging that work-life balance we were talking about, you're just going to see widespread burnout, high turnover, and ultimately like a decline in the overall performance.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster, really. So
Yeah.
how do you avoid falling into that trap?
Well, Blastland's argument is that by actively focusing on those NUCLEA principles, you can actually proactively build a more like resilient and sustainable company culture. For instance, instead of just like demanding results, you lead with empathy. You foster a more supportive and understanding environment.
Okay, so it's all about, making those principles, those NUCLEA principles, making them like a core part of how you lead, how you operate, not just paying lip service to them.
Yeah, you got it. Now, there's one more piece of this balance sheet puzzle that's particularly interesting. Blastland includes trust and and fun under equity.
Wait, fun. Like having a good time at work. I mean, yeah, sure, that's great. But like how does that factor into a leadership balance sheet?
Well, it goes back to, I think, their human-centric approach, right? They
Yeah.
believe that when people feel trusted, when they feel valued, and when there's like an element of enjoyment in their work, you're going to have a more engaged and productive workforce.
So it's not just about ping pong tables and casual Fridays. It's about creating a culture where people actually like genuinely enjoy what they do and they feel this like sense of camaraderie with the people around them.
Exactly. And they're saying that sense of trust and enjoyment, it actually becomes like a foundational element of a healthy and successful organization. It's not just like a nice to have, it's a core part of their equity.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how Blastland is kind of like reframing this whole understanding of what it actually means for a company to be successful. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the people, the culture, and those principles that guide everything.
And the thing is, they don't just lay out this like theoretical framework. They actually give concrete examples of how their principles are put into action, and they show how those things impact both the assets and liabilities on their balance sheet.
Well, I think this is where it gets really interesting. Let's dive into those examples and see how Blastland is really like walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Let's start with navigate uncertainty, Most companies, they see volatility as like a threat, but Blastland actually embraces it. They use this technique called scenario planning, where they create these detailed what if plans for all these different potential crises. So they're not caught off guard when something unexpected happens.
So instead of just like hoping for the best, they're actively preparing for a range of possibilities, even the negative ones.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And they don't stop at just planning. They also invest in resilience training for their employees, teaching them how to adapt and stay calm when things get a little stressful.
So it's like they're building like an internal shock absorber that can handle, whatever comes their way.
Yeah.
But how does that tie back to their leadership balance sheet?
Well, remember how we were talking about the importance of having strong leadership as a long-term asset? So by mastering that navigate uncertainty principle, they're essentially boosting that asset, right? They're becoming known as a company that can lead effectively even in really challenging times.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection. So it's not just about like weathering the storm, it's about emerging from it, even stronger.
Right. And that strength extends to their teams as well. Remember that liability we discussed, that internal conflicts. Well, Blastland tackles that head on with the Unite Teams principle.
Yeah, I'm curious about this one. How do they actually put that into practice?
Well, it's not just about team building exercises. Blastland, they actively promote a culture of collaboration. They set like really clear shared goals,
Oh.
so everyone's pulling in the same direction. And they encourage open communication so that if there are disagreements, they can be addressed constructively and people can work through those things.
Feel like they're weaving this fabric of trust and shared purpose, and that kind of holds the team together, even when things get tough.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And that strong team dynamic, it directly translates into reduced conflicts, lower turnover, and ultimately a more, harmonious and productive work environment. So they're turning a potential liability into a really powerful asset.
I love this. So each principle it's like a strategic move, right? And it strengthens their overall position on that leadership balance sheet.
It really is. Now let's talk about cultivate innovation. And this one's all about creating a company culture where new ideas are not just welcomed, they're like actively sought out.
Yeah, we all know those companies that say they value innovation, but then they shoot down any idea that doesn't fit the mold.
Yeah.
How does Blastland avoid that?
Well, they do a couple of things really well. First, they empower employees at all levels to bring ideas to the table, not just, the people at the top. And they have systems in place to actually like test and implement those ideas. So it's not just, throwing an idea in a suggestion box and hoping for the best.
So it's not just talking the talk. It's about actually having a system that supports and rewards innovation.
Yeah.
And that must do wonders for their curiosity surge asset.
Absolutely. And it also helps mitigate another liability, skill gaps. By constantly encouraging new ideas and approaches, they're less likely to fall behind as technology evolves and the market changes.
It's like they're building this internal engine of continuous learning and adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. Now this next principle is one that really resonated with me. Lead with empathy. It's about recognizing that employees, they're human beings, right? And they have lives and challenges outside of work, and those things they inevitably affect their performance.
I think a lot of like traditional business models really like struggle with that. It's all about the bottom line
Yeah.
and not necessarily about the well-being of the people who are actually like contributing to it.
Yeah. But Blastland's argument is that empathy is not just like a nice to have. It's a key ingredient for building a resilient and high-performing team.
So how do they actually practice empathy as leaders? Is it just about being nice?
Well, it's more about creating a culture of trust and open communication. Leaders, they encourage employees to share their challenges, and they actively listen and they respond with understanding.
So instead of just saying, "Hey, leave your problems at the door,"
Yeah.
they're acknowledging that everyone's dealing with something and they're creating space for that to be okay.
Right, exactly. And that directly impacts their trust equity. By leading with empathy, they're building this foundation of trust, and it strengthens the whole organization.
Okay, I'm getting it. So empathy isn't just this like touchy-feely concept. It's a strategic advantage.
Yeah.
Now what about empowered decision making? That seems particularly important in today's fast-paced world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Blastland recognizes that waiting for decisions to kind of like trickle down from the top can be really slow and inefficient.
Yeah.
They give their employees the authority to make decisions within their areas of expertise.
So instead of like micromanaging every little detail, they're trusting their employees to make, informed choices.
Exactly. And that trust empowers employees to take ownership of their work,
Mhm.
which leads to greater engagement and a stronger sense of responsibility.
And I bet it also helps to avoid that dreaded decision paralysis that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, for sure. By empowering their employees to make decisions, they're creating a much more like agile and responsive organization.
Yeah.
Decisions get made quicker, problems get solved faster, and opportunities are seized more readily.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Each principle is like a multi-purpose tool, and it not only strengthens their assets but also helps them avoid or overcome those potential liabilities.
You're exactly right. And that brings us to, I guess, the final two principles: adapt through agility and reshape the future. And these are all about long-term vision and adaptability.
Okay, let's break those down. What does adapt through agility actually like look like in practice?
So it's about being able to pivot quickly in response to changes in the market, technology, or even just unexpected disruptions, right? They've got this internal flexibility, and it allows them to adjust their strategies and processes without missing a beat.
So instead of getting like bogged down by bureaucracy, they're able to move quickly and seize opportunities as they arise. But what about reshape the future? Like how do you reshape the future?
Well, it's about having that visionary outlook, right? Like anticipating trends and actively shaping the direction of the company rather than just like reacting to events.
So they're not just following the crowd, they're carving their own path.
Yeah, exactly. And both of these principles really feed into their their long-term assets. Their agility allows them to like stay ahead of the curve and adapt to new challenges, while their visionary leadership ensures that they're always kind of pushing toward this future that they believe in.
I'm realizing this whole NUCLER framework, it's more than just a set of like nice sounding principles. It's like a blueprint for building a company that's not only successful but also resilient, adaptable, and truly human-centered.
And that's what makes Blastland's approach so compelling. They're showing us that it's possible to achieve both profitability and a positive people-focused culture. You
Yeah.
know, they're challenging that traditional business mindset and offering a new way to measure success.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. It's made me think about my own work and how I can apply these principles to create a more positive and productive environment. But I'm also wondering how this translates to the individual level.
Yeah.
Can these principles benefit someone even if they're not leading a company?
That's a great question, and that's one that we'll explore as we dive into the final part of our deep dive. You know, these principles, they aren't just for CEOs and executives. They're valuable tools for anyone who wants to navigate uncertainty, build strong relationships, and just create a more fulfilling life.
So, we've spent this whole deep dive kind of exploring Blastland's approach to leadership. But I think what's really exciting is that these principles aren't just for, like CEOs or managers.
Oh, I totally agree. Actually, you know what? I would argue that these principles are even more relevant for like individuals, just navigating their own careers, their own lives.
Okay, I like that. Give me an example. How does something like navigate uncertainty actually apply outside the boardroom?
Well, think about it. We're all constantly facing uncertainty in our lives, right? Whether it's job changes, relationship shifts, or even just trying to figure out what we're having for dinner tonight.
Oh yeah, the Kenner dilemma. That's a real thing. But seriously, how can we use that navigate uncertainty principle to make those decisions, a little easier?
I think instead of like getting overwhelmed by the unknown, just try applying that scenario planning technique that Blastland uses, to your own life. So, like, what are the potential outcomes of a decision? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? And by mentally preparing for those different possibilities, I think it can really reduce anxiety, and you can make more informed choices.
Yeah, so it's about like taking back that sense of control, even when things feel, completely unpredictable. I like that. What about unite teams? That one seems like pretty specific to the workplace.
Yeah, it might seem that way at first, but think about like all the teams that we're a part of in our lives, right? Like our families, our friend groups, community organizations, stuff like that. And the principle of unite teams, it's really all about building strong collaborative relationships, and that's based on, shared goals and open communication.
So even if you're not like leading a team at work, you can still apply those principles to really improve your relationships with the people around you.
Totally. And that brings us to cultivate innovation. And it's easy to think of innovation as something that happens, in labs or tech companies, but it's really about like having a curious mind and looking for new ways of doing things in every aspect of your life.
Yeah. So whether you're trying to improve your cooking skills or learn a new language or even just figure out, a more efficient way to organize your closet, you can embrace that spirit of innovation.
Exactly. It's about like challenging your assumptions and always being open to learning and growing.
Okay, so this is starting to really click for me now. These principles are really about adopting a new mindset, like a way of approaching life with curiosity, with resilience, and with a commitment to building those strong relationships. What about lead with empathy? How does that one translate to the individual level?
I think it goes back to what we were saying about building those strong relationships, right?
Right.
And leading with empathy, it means being able to understand and connect with the people around you, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. And it's about listening actively, validating their feelings, and responding with compassion.
So it's not just about being like nice to people. It's about really trying to like see things from their perspective and build those bridges of understanding.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly powerful, not just in your personal relationships, but also in your community and even like in the broader world.
This whole conversation has been so empowering. It's like Lastland has given us this toolkit, right?
Right.
Not just for being like better leaders at work, but
Yeah.
for actually living more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
And the best part is that these tools are accessible to everyone, you know? You don't need a fancy title or a corner office to start applying them. You can start right now, like today, in your everyday interactions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. Think about those NUCLER principles and how you can start incorporating them into your own life. Maybe you want to try like Blastland scenario planning technique for an upcoming decision, or maybe you want to really focus on leading with empathy in your relationships. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making a conscious effort to grow and learn and to approach life with that sense of curiosity and purpose.
So keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep challenging yourself to become the best version of you. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into, another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious.